Hey Blender, Bob here. Before we start, have you seen this clip? This guy is amazing. He does some really cool stuff. He only has 1,300 subscribers. You go see him. The link is in the description, and up there you give him some love. You subscribe to his channel because I want to see more from this guy. Okay, now this is part 2, episode 2 of my series on Ask Blender Bob, where you tell me which shot from some movies that you would like me to show you how it's been done, and I will try to reproduce it the best I can in Blender. Now this one is from Infinity War, where we have all the people just dissolving into dust. Can we do this in Blender? Well, let's give it a shot. Now, this is a demo. So when you're going to look at my stuff, you can say, well, it doesn't look the same. It's not exactly, it's the blah, blah, blah. Of course, it's not the same. I don't have 3 weeks of R&D to do just for a Blender Bob. So it's just, I'm showing you some proof of concept or some, a toned down version of what it is. Because if you take a good look at the real thing, you will see that the face is cracking and it's changing colors and there's a lot of details and there's some smoke and there's a lot of things in there. It would be too long to do everything. Already this clip is going to be about like 30 minutes long. It's, so don't expect to get a 100% match. It's not going to happen, that's for sure. All right, so let's start right away. So this is the shot that I decided to use for the demo, but we will see that it's not that simple. And this is the shot that I did. Now you will think, how come he's not moving anymore? Well, you will see later. So here's the concept. The idea is to use the weight pane to generate particles. So the first thing I need to do is to select the body here. I will go into edit mode, vertex, and I will create a vertex group here. So you just go in the little triangle here, you create a vertex group and you click assign to make sure everything is in there. You then create a dynamic paint modifier, and in there we're going to play with some settings. So what we want is to make it a canvas. We decide the start frame and end frame. And what we want to do is to paint the weight. But the weight of what? What is it going to change? Well, it's going to change the vertex group that we just created. For the brushes that are going to modify the weight, these are spheres, and I also added a dynamic paint, but these are brushes instead of canvas. The default settings are fine. You can see there's another one inside that is parented to the first one, but this one has erase paint, so it's going to do the opposite of the first one. Now I just needed to animate them, and I did the same thing for all 3 of them. So if you want to play it, you don't see anything because you need to select the guy and actually go into weight paint mode. So I'm going to go here and weight paint. And now if I play the animation, you can see I got this little strip of red, and this is where I want my particles to be emitted from. Okay, so that's step 1. I will have particles emitted from the red strips. But now we want the parts that have already been emitted to disappear, like the legs, the head, the arm. I want them gone. So for this, I will need to create a mask. So in compositing, we're going to be able to erase these parts. Because this is a demonstration, I made a copy of the guy, but it actually could be done on the same geometry. So let's turn off this collection and turn on the mask one. Okay, now I got a new guy here. This new guy also have a dynamic paint modifier, but this time it's going to be different. What we want to do is to generate an image sequence. Since I already have some dynamic paint brushes, I decided to create a collection for this one to make sure there's not going to be any conflicts. So I made this collection here. So these are the spheres that I'm going to use to paint, and it's just a single sphere. I don't need 2 for this one. So dynamic paint, the settings are we're going to paint black because in compositing, white is opaque, black is transparent, which means we need to go back to our guy and make sure that the default color will be white. We want him white, and all the parts that disappear are going to become black. So I get my guy here and I go down into default color here, the initial color, and I make it white. Set the cache path where you want it and bake the sequence. In order to see the result, you need to apply a shader on the guy. It's something very simple. Actually, you just take the paint sequence that you have and you plug it straight into the material output. Make sure you turn on auto refresh if you want it to update live. So now I can do the playback and you will see all the arms, head and everything, they will just disappear into black. Great. Cool, now we should be good to go, right? So let's go back to our first man, the one with the weight, and we're gonna add particles on this guy. So add particles system, let's say 10,000 particles because 1,000 is not enough. You have start frame and frame, that's okay. For the velocity, we don't want them to move, so we're going to put this to 0. What else we have? The size of the particles, we're going to make them smaller. This is just the display for now, so let's make them a little bit smaller. Yeah, just like that. We don't want any gravity, and we want the density of the particles to be driven by our vertex group that we just created with our weight paint. Oh, there's one more setting I forgot. I need to go back all the way up here. You want to make sure that you turn on the use modifier stack so that it considers all the modifiers that are applied to the geometry. All right, let's give it a shot. I'm going to press play and let's see what happens. Absolutely nothing. Why is that? Okay, let's go back in our particles here. I will turn off modifier stack and now I get particles. And if I play it, well, but that's not what I want. So I will turn it back on and oh, now it works. Strange, huh? So let's play again and it doesn't work. Because it's broken and I did my research and yeah, got confirmation it is broken. Plan B. What if I try to generate the vertex weight using the geometry nodes? Maybe that will work. So I made this very simple setup here and I'm just going to add some particles. All right, it's all there. Let me turn them on and play. And I guess it doesn't seem to work. Let's try it in normal mode, just in the object mode, because sometimes you get different results. And no, you see, it doesn't work. Plan C. Okay, so let's go to plan B. We're going to keep this setup here, but we're going to create a mask modifier. And the idea will be to actually cut the geometry. I'm going to put it between the dynamic paint and the particle system. And I'm going to use the vertex group. Let me turn off the particles so that we can see what's going on for real. All right, this is all good. So if I press play, you can see it's cutting the geometry just where I need it. So that should work, right? So I'll turn the particles back on and press play again and woohoo, it works! But is it really working? Take a good look. There's something strange going on here. You see the origin? I got particles generating from the origin. That makes no sense at all. There's no geometry there. And just to prove you that it is the origin, let me move it away. So I will just move it somewhere else, right there. And if I scroll the animation, you can see it's right there at the origin. We can see it better if I turn on some gravity. So I'll go back in my particles and gravity, let's put it to 1 and play again. Back and play. And you can see all these particles falling. So you probably think, well, just put your origin outside the frame. It doesn't matter if you have a few particles coming out outside, but these are an awful lot of particles on top of each other. And I tried something with 90,000 particles for the real shot, and most of the particles were going to that origin. So it didn't work at all. It was getting completely crazy. So I sent a bug report and the reply came very fast. It's a known problem. I'm not the first one who reports this. And it's unlikely that they will fix it because soon they will scrap the entire particle system and include it into the geometry nodes. So why spend time on, fixing something that's going to be obsolete very soon? Also, when I was caching the geometry, for some reason it took forever. Now it just became like, nothing was moving. So I abandoned this. Blender developers, it's really important when you develop the new system that you make something that the particle could stick to a surface and even a deforming surface. And particles that could attach to a surface stick to it on contact. So if you have like mud or leaves or something like this and the foot steps on it, when it moves out, the particles are stuck on the foot. And also a system that will detach the particles when a force is applied to them with a certain threshold, they will just separate from the object. Please, please, please. Plan D. Okay, let's try something else. I made a copy of my guy and this guy is going to be completely covered with particles. So I got my guy here and 20,000 particles just for test. Now I'll go from frame 2 to frame 2, not 1, because sometimes I want to do some tweaks and I go to frame 1 and I don't want it to refresh live as I change the settings. So I always start them at frame 2. Lifetime 60 frames because that's the length of my animation. No need to go longer than that for now. So just like before, we don't want anything in the velocity. We don't want anything in the gravity. And we're going to remove, show emitter because we don't want to see the guy as we emit the particles. And I'm going to remove the vertex group here because we don't need it. Because you can understand that I just made a copy of the previous guy. Now I'm going to use turbulence fields. So you just go add field turbulence, 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 turbulence. So in there you have some options. Here you have, for example, the strength, how strong do you want it to be, the size. We'll see it later. If you play with the size, the smaller it is, the more details you will get in the turbulence. You can put some noise also in it, which is interesting. So I'm just putting some settings right now, see how it goes. And you have a maximum and minimum distance. So this is the influence of the force field. So everything that comes inside this circle will be influenced. So let's take a look, play, and yeah, that's what we want. Now the difficult part is to make many simulations to get the right amount of turbulence, of noise, and the size of the turbulence and everything until you get the result that you're looking for. And this takes forever. So now we have a solution for emitting our particles. But do we? In movies, we're not dealing with still images, we're dealing with moving characters, and if I move my character, well, the particles don't follow. So I made a test. I have my geometry that emits particles and another one where I put a displacement modifier and I animated it so that I get a moving geometry. And I also added a field, an harmonic field, and this attracts particles to this geometry. So when I press play, you can see the particles stick to the surface that's being deformed. But when the field comes in, well, they just fight each other and I cannot get the particles to escape the harmonic field. Plan E? Well, there is no plan E. At this point, you need to go to plan H, and I will let you figure out what is plan H. So unfortunately, I just couldn't find a way to do this on an animated shot in Blender. We also need a clean plate. What is a clean plate? Well, a clean plate is this. See? Nobody. So, many years ago, I had this shot I needed to fix. The VFX supervisor, fresh out of school, thought, well, I'm going to do the opposite of what they do for the weather. So instead of having a guy on a green screen and we change the green screen for something else, I'm going to dress somebody in blue or green and we can just key the guy and he's going to magically disappear, right? But he didn't show the clean plate. I don't know what's behind the guy. So if you look at the shot, I don't have any information on the top of the house behind him. So even if I remove him, I still need to reconstruct everything that's behind. No clean plates, and I had like 10 shots to do like this. Not a single one had a clean plate. It was a total nightmare. And maybe the guy thought that if you click, on the blue, it will magically make the guy disappear. But you need something to replace behind. And also, the guy makes shadows on the ground. You need to remove the shadow too. So it's not magic, okay? It's VFX. This anecdote was brought to you by Blender Bob. Blender Bob, when you need VFX done by a guy who knows what clean plates are and how important they are. Blender Bob, call now. Operators are waiting. 1-800-BLENDER Bob. The first step is to copy my base layer here and use the clone tool to paint Thanos out of the picture. So get out of there. I don't want to see your ugly face anymore. If I turn on and off my backplate here, you can see that the sky changed on the one with Thanos. So what I need to do now is to create a plate with Thanos with the clean plates. I will copy again the Thanos, I'll put it on top, and I'm just going to create a mask, and I'm going to mask the original background so I can see the background that I retouched before. So paint on the mask until I reveal the sky. It doesn't have to be that precise. I mean, we're just doing a demo here, so I'm not going to do a roto and all this stuff. I'm just going to go very fast. So this is what we want. I'm going to create a third layer, and this one I'm going to extend Thanos in the black lines because we're going to use this texture for the color of the particles when they get emitted, and we don't want particles to be emitted in black. That would be kind of, not good. So yeah, quick paint here just to get this. It doesn't have to be precise, it doesn't matter. Okay, back in Blender, I imported the image plane in the back. So this is just my Thanos image that I put there. And I'm going to import my model. This is a model I found on the internet. It was a free model for 3D printing. The link will be in the description. So now I need to match the plate here. Well, obviously in the real movie, this is not something they would have to do. They would already have the model and the textures and everything. But now we have to cheat. We need to get a 3D model. So that's what I'm going to do. I'm just going to move him and try to match him the best I can. It doesn't have to be super precise. We just want to get the basic shape of the actor. Well, the actor, the CG model. Well, you know what I mean. We need to match this the best we can. Okay, it looks like the nose is too big, it's too long, so I'm going to select a few points, and with this turned on, I'm going to be able to move it up a little bit. All right, that should work. As I said, it doesn't need to be that precise. So more tweaks. I need to cover the entire area of my model, and as I said, we don't need that much precision. It's just for emitting particles. Now we need to texture that guy. Well, it's going to be very easy. You just select your object, you go in edit mode, you select all the faces or vertices, whatever, and you go into UV and you go project from view. So now the UVs are done according to the view that you have here. And all I need to do is to create a very basic shader. Actually, it's just a material output, and I get my project image. This is the one with the extended head. that I did, and I will just connect it straight into the surface, and I get my shaded Thanos. Now, if I turn around, you will see that it looks like crap from the side because it's projected from the camera's point of view, and you see in the eye here it's all distorted. Well, it doesn't matter because the only thing we care about is the view from the camera, and in this case, it's perfect. So we're going to emit particles from Thanos, but what we need is ashes kind of particles. So I'm going to create a sprite sheet. So this is one texture where I will have all little tiny textures inside the big textures for all the different ashes sprites, if you want, that I'm going to use. Now 49 is probably overkill. I could have used just 9, but anyway, it's not that long to make. Okay, I will invert the image because white is opaque and black is transparent. Back in Blender, I will create a grid, and this grid will have, just like my texture in Photoshop, 7 by 7 divisions. Okay, now I will apply the texture on the shader. Let's see what it looks like. Now I need to split each polygon individually. So I tried to split vertices, it didn't work. So instead what I did was an extrude individual. So now they're all separate. And I inverted the selection and deleted the polygons. So now if I select one polygon, I can see that it's not connected to the other ones anymore. And now I just need to do a separate by loose parts, and they will become all individual objects. Make sure to do a set origin center of mass. Okay, now I will reset the transform to 0, and I will copy all selected, so this way they are all on top of each other. The texture I created in Photoshop actually goes to the alpha. I put it in the color so I could see what's going on, but now I will plug it back into the alpha, and I will disconnect the base color. We're going to play more with the shader later. So now if I go into render mode, and I go into cycles, you can see, well, now you cannot see anything. You can see that I get these sprites here that are kind of this like fuzzy ashes kind of stuff. But they look kind of flat. So we're gonna add a subdivision modifier, and we're gonna put the subdivision to 3 just to give it enough divisions. So I will put it in simple because I want to keep the square shape. And optimize display, I will turn it off so I can see the amount of polygons that I have. So 3 looks good, perfect. Now I will copy this modifier to all the other sprites. So I need to select all of them by just pressing Shift. And unless I change the default hotkey, in my case it's Control P, I can go copy modifiers, and now they all have it. I need to apply all these modifiers. So I click this button here, apply all. If you don't have these buttons, it's because you don't have the modifier tool add-on turned on. It comes with Blender, it's free, go for it, it's very useful. Okay, now I will select all the vertices for all the sprites at the same time, and I will go in mesh and I will do a randomize. So that will allow me to change the surface, make it less flat. Well, you can see it's too much. I just didn't want to use a flat surface because it doesn't light well and it's not going to look organic enough. Alright, I am done with the sprites. Back to Thanos. Okay, I created a particle system, let's say 10,000 particles just to make tests. Start frame and frame 2 like I said before. Lifetime 140 because our shot is actually going to be 140 frames. What else? Normals, we don't want any speed at all, and we want to turn off the gravity at 0. So now if I press play, this is what I'm going to get. The sprites I did before, I actually did them in a separate Blender file, and what I did was just to copy them and paste them in this file and put them in a collection that I call particle exterior. There's a reason why I call them exterior. So now here, instead of halo, we want a collection, and the collection is going to be the particle exterior. Looks like they are super tiny, we cannot see them, so I will play with the scale until I can see something reasonable. I will also play with the scale randomness so that they don't have all the same size, so get some variations. But you can see that they all have the same orientation, and to fix that we're going to turn on the rotations and put it to normal. So now if I regenerate the particles, ta-da-dam! I added 3 lights, a blue light, a purple light, and a yellow light to match what's on the plate. Now we're going to tweak the particle shaders. So I got the Thanos image here. That's the plate that I did before with Thanos. I plug it in the color and the emission. Why the emission? Because I already have the light baked in the image, so I don't really need it. That's why I put it in the emission. I got the sprite texture for the alpha, for the transparency. I also created a mapping node and a texture coordinate where I connect the UV into the vector. Important, you need to turn on from instancer if you want the particles to take the color of the object. So connect, come on. All right, let's move it away. Connect. All right, so let's take a look in render mode. You need to be in cycle render mode to see the particle colors. If you turn on the camera background image, you will see this black around the particles. It looks like it doesn't calculate the transparency. Well, it doesn't like this because it's just a preview on screen, but when you do the final render, it's going to be just fine. Okay, before I continue with the shaders, I need to do something first. I added the turbulence field like I've shown you before. So I've changed some settings here and there and make sure that I got my max distance and all these parameters okay. And I animated it to go from right to left. Well, obviously it's not that interesting in shaded mode because it's too slow, so I'm going to switch to flat mode. And now I get a real-time preview. Here we go. Now that's pretty cool. Alright, so now they're just flying away, but we need them to move on the right side. So for this, I'm going to add another field. It's going to be a wind field. So I made sure that it's centered with the turbulence field, and I parented it to the turbulence so that this way, when I move it, they will both move together. Some setting adjustments again. Okay, let's give it a try. I will spare you the hours I spent trying to find the right parameters. Okay, that's pretty cool, but now they're flying away, they need to go down eventually. We cannot turn on the gravity on the particles, otherwise they're gonna fall from the beginning. So what I did for that is to create another wind, but this one is not parented to the original one, it's not gonna move. And if you look at it from the top view, it's huge, it's enormous. I need to zoom out even more so we can see the entire thing here. Now, it could have been smaller if there was a box available here, but there's only sphere, tubes, and cone. I know another software that has cubes for their fields. So from the side view, you will see when they enter this zone between the min and max, they start falling down. Okay, now that we have moving particles, what I would like to do is to change the shader on the particles as they move away from their original place. The thing is that the effect is not always the same. If we take a look at her, for example, her face becomes completely brown before it spreads away. But if you look at Spider-Man, you can still feel the skin texture flying away before it becomes brown. So I decided to go for something similar. I'm going to test it with two emission shaders first. It's going to be faster and easier to read. So I connect them to a mix shader and then directly into the surface of the material output. And if I change the factor here, I go from one to the other. Now what's going to drive this change is going to be the particles. There's a node called particle info. I cannot use the age of the particle or the lifetime or whatever because the particles are all generated at the same time. So I will use the velocity instead. So as soon as they start moving, they will switch to the other shader. And the faster they move, the more they will change. So you see I got this nice gradient here. I can also add a math node that I will set to multiply, and this will allow me to tweak the speed, how it changes. So if I change it like this, you can see now it's going to go faster if I put it to 5. So if I play back, now I can see my particles are just changing colors. Yeah, that looks pretty good. Okay, time to use the real shader. So this one we already have, so I can delete this one. And for the ash look, I'm going to create a new shader. So I connect it here at the bottom, and it's just a beige color. There's a little bit of subsurface scattering, and I want to reuse the transparency of the sprite on the shader too. Well, it doesn't look like in the film because in the film when they dissipate, it's either very orange or neutral daytime color, so it feels very brown. But in my case, I get very blue and yellow and purple colors, so the ash turns into these colors. One thing we need to fix is that the way it's set up right now, the particles are created on the shell on the outside of the object, so it's never going to feel right. I'm going to create a render layer that I'm going to call particle exterior because this is the outside shell. And I will put my Thanos into a collection also called particle exterior. Now I will duplicate this collection here. So you just right click and you go duplicate collection. You don't want to do a duplicate linked, you want to do a duplicate collection. So now I got another Thanos. I'm going to rename this one particle interior. By making the copy, I also get the particle system attached to it. And you can see there's a little 2 that means it's used on 2 different objects. So I'm going to click on this number so it becomes an individual particle system. It's separate from the other one. So this one, instead of being the surface, is going to be the interior. I name my stuff, I name everything because otherwise it becomes too confusing. So these are the interior, and the difference here is that I'm going to emit from the volume. I turned off the collection for particle exterior, but the one interior does the same thing. Well, that's because I didn't click on use modifier stack. So now you see I get the particles from inside. There's another issue we need to fix. When we generate the particles from inside, they're supposed to take the color of the surface, but we're not on the surface, we're inside, it's a volume. So the way we're going to fix this is we're going to take the particle exterior collection, the one that has all the sprites in there, and we're going to duplicate it. So duplicate collection. Now we got another set. This one we're going to call it particle interior. Very important here, you need to click on this button to make a copy of the shader, so you don't want to affect both particle systems. And you want to make sure that all the objects in the particle interior collection have this shader assigned to them, which I forgot to do at the time of recording. Okay, so all this part here we don't need, we can get rid of it. We don't need anything connected to the alpha either, so we're just going to set it to 1 because we want everything to be completely transparent. Another thing quite important to do, well, is to go back to Thanos in the particle system and tell it, hey, now I want to use the particle interior. So now if we look at it rendered, we can see that the particles go from invisible to visible. I made a few render tests and I realized that maybe I need some thickness to my flakes, so I just added a solidify modifier to all of them. Okay, let's do some cleanup before it becomes a mess. I'm on particle exterior, so I need the collection particle exterior, and I don't want the particle interior. I'm going to copy the settings here, rename this one particle interior, and I'll make sure that I only have the particle interior turned on. Remember from the beginning, 20 minutes ago, well, we need a mask. So we're going to duplicate our Thanos here. We're going to put him into another collection that we're going to call mask. And this collection, we're going to put it into another render layer. So I'm going to copy the settings here and call this one mask. But again, I want to make sure that I clean up everything. So I turned off the particles here. I need to go back to the other layers, turn off the mask, and go in this one here, turn off the mask. So now everything is clean. All right. Now the mask. We don't need any particles for this one, so bang, they're gone. I will need a new shader, so I will create another one here, new, and I will call it mask. I don't need the Thanos shader, so I'll get rid of it. Bang. Okay, all right. You know what? I'm going to do more cleanup. I'm going to put all the fields into a collection. So just call it, well, guess what? Fields. I'm so original in my naming, and now I can turn it off. So, keep it clean. Hey, this one goes there too. All right. Okay, back on Thanos, I'm going to add a dynamic paint modifier, and I'm going to click on add canvas. For this one, what we want to do is the format, instead of vertex, we want to paint an image sequence. We're going to give it a path where we want this image sequence to be saved. Now we need a brush, so I added a sphere and I put also a dynamic paint modifier on it. And I just leave everything by default, that should be good. Just make sure you are on mesh volume and proximity so that you don't have a very straight line in the mask. Okay, back on Thanos, it's time to bake the image sequence. If we want to see the result, well, we will need to create an image node and we're going to plug what we just cached into the color. It doesn't seem like it's working, and that's because I'm an idiot. I forgot to animate the sphere. It needs to move at the same rate as the turbulence field. So I just put the sphere at the right place, and pressing shift, I just dragged it on the turbulence, and now it's parented to it. I also added it to the same collection. Okay, so now it's going back and forth. Looks good. From the tests I did, I realized that it doesn't work well when the UVs are projected from the camera like we did before, so I will do a smart UV project instead. I don't know why it does that. It should work, but it doesn't. Okay, so now I'm going to bake the sequence again. It's going to override the other one. And now it seems to be working. Make sure you turn on auto refresh, otherwise it's not going to update in real time. So it looks okay, but there are some artifacts. Hey, you know what? I don't need the principal BSDF. I'm just going to connect it straight into the material output. So yeah, if we take a closer look, we get all these problems here. I've never been able to fix them. So we're going to do what we do all the time. Fix it in comp. There's something else I just realized. I need this to be applied to the background too. Otherwise, I'm just going to see the particles where it's white and the background will be black. So I'm going to create a plane that I'm going to put behind the character, and I'm going to join them together by pressing J, and I will redo the UVs and I will rebake the image sequence. And it looks like crap, and that's because the images are already cached in the computer's memory. So what you need to do is delete the image and reload it. And now if I play back, it's working. I've made many tests, and at the end I concluded that for the particle exterior I needed 35,000 particles, and for the interior ones 45,000. Once you're done with all the adjustments on the particles, on the turbulence, on everything, you need to bake all the particles, so you just click here on Bake All Dynamics. So you guys are still there because I got an average viewing time of 6 minutes, and now it's been much more than that, and at this point probably 90% of you guys already quit watching this video, unfortunately. Anyways, we need to continue. Now we need to comp that stuff. And yes, we're gonna do it in Blender.
So this is our first layer. This is the external particles. And it looks like a nice painting, but it doesn't look realistic at all. So that's why we will need the wipe that goes through this to cover the parts that we don't want. I can show you another frame so we can see what it looks like. So let's go at this frame here and we see how it's fading away. Now these are the particles that are inside. I added a little gamma just to make them a little bit darker, and that's why I rendered them into separate layers so I could adjust them. And then I just do an alpha over to mix them together. Okay, so now we need the mask. So this is the mask here, and this is what it looks like. So if I move around, you will see that it reveals the character as I scroll through this. Look how slow this is. It's insane. It takes like 4 seconds to refresh. I only have an EXR file in there with 2 JPEGs. It takes forever. Anyways, these are the artifacts. I said we would fix it in comp. Well, it's not going to be in Blender because we don't have a paint tool in Blender to do this. So we'll do it in Nuke. Okay, I also added a gamma so you can see it's a sharper blend. And you can see there's an offset also of 2 frames. It's just because I wanted to get a better timing when I did this. It'll just look better with the offset. I can afford to do this because we're working on a still frame and not an animation. Anyways, then I got my alpha over that I did before. I separate the RGB because what I want is the alpha here. So let's take a look. This is the RGB and this is the alpha. So we want to take this alpha here and multiply it with the mask. So this way it will only reveal the particles in the white areas. So I got the mask, but it's not connected to the color yet. So I will go back here where I got my RGB here. I will combine them together because the next node, the lens distortion, requires an image and not RGB channels. And this is the effect that you get if you play with the dispersion. You see, it creates a chromatic aberration. I can turn it on and off. So on and off. This is a trick we use all the time to comp CG stuff to make it more realistic. After the lens distortion, I need to separate the image again into RGB because after this I need to combine it with the alpha that we just created, the mask. So I get my RGB and the alpha from the mask, and this is what it looks like. Now it's kind of strange that we got this ghost image here. That's because it's not pre-multiplied. We don't need to pre-multiply it because it's going to do it when we use the alpha over. Okay, so now let's take a look at the next node. It's the blur node. I just added a little blur just to make it less CG because everything that comes out of a renderer is always too sharp. I'm not sure if you can see it with the YouTube compression, but it's there. Alright, now we got our background here. We need to add Thanos on top, but first we're going to start with the mask. So it's the same file, but I made it a separate one because the offset is different on this one. It's -11. I added a separate RGB here, but actually I don't need it. This is a Nuke reflex, so comping in Nuke I would need this, but I don't need it, so I will just get rid of it. Okay, so I have a little gamma here. This is also to control the fall off here, and then I invert it. Why do I need to invert it? It's because in this case, we want to reveal what's behind the particles. We want to reveal the guy and not this part. So now we got our mask. Let's move on to Thanos. I need to apply that mask to this image. So what I do again is to separate the RGB. So we get this. And in the alpha, for the combined RGB after, I'm going to take the output here and just connect it into the alpha. And this is what I get. So as you can see, when I move the time slider, my Thanos just disappears. And again, we get this ghost effect. That's okay. We don't need to worry about it. So now I need to put my Thanos over the clean plate. So I got my clean plate here. It's just an alpha over. And as I move the time slider, I can reveal my Thanos. You can see that the alpha over node has a check on convert pre-multiply. This is the option that will remove the ghost effect that we had. And it's time to add our particles on top of Thanos and the background. So again, an alpha over with the convert pre-multiply. And if we take a look at the result, well, this is what we get. Now let me show you why I added a gamma on the mask. You can see here, this doesn't look too good. It's kind of too soft for the edge. So I want a transition that is sharper. So if I turn the gamma back on, all the bad part disappeared and I get a sharper edge. Then I added a crop node so I can remove the black lines on top and the bottom. And finally, a file output node. This is the same thing in Nuke. So it starts with my image here and I need to do a shuffle to separate the different layers. So this one is for the external particles, and look at the refresh, look how fast it is. It's way much more responsive, and we're talking about the same images on the same machine. Okay, so the second node is the internal particles. and again the gamma to make them a little bit darker, and I merged them together. Let's move on to the transition mask. So I got the shuffle here to get my mask. I got my time offset here. This shuffle, I don't need it. I don't know why I put it there, so I'll just get rid of it. I have 2 grain nodes because I was experimenting with some stuff, but actually it could be just one, and the only thing I did with them was to play with the gamma. So when I play with the gamma slider, you can see the influence it does on the decay. Well, if I can call it like that. Now I need to merge the mask with the alpha from the particles, and for this I need a shuffle node. And what this shuffle will do is to copy the alpha channel onto the R, G, and B. Then I will merge them together in multiply mode, so I get the exact same thing I had in the Blender comp. And the copy node will take the color from the B input and the alpha from the A input. Now for the mask for Thanos, I got my time offset here. This one is set to 11 frames. I got a grade, just like I did in Blender. And I got my Thanos here. Again, I use a copy node to switch the alpha, to add this alpha to the Thanos plate. And invert it, like I did in Blender, and I pre-multiply it. This is something you need to do in Nuke. You don't have to do it in Blender, but you need to do it in Nuke. And I merge it with the plate, so I got the same thing. But look how reactive it is. I mean, it's real time when I slide. Okay, so now let's do the color adjustment stuff. I had the chromatic aberration here. So if I zoom in, I can turn it on and off, and you can see the difference it makes. I pre-multiplied the image, I added a slight blur, and I merged them over the plate. You can see that I added some grain. This is something you cannot do in Blender because there is no grain node. Well, you probably don't see it because of the YouTube compression, but there is some grain in there. That second blur shouldn't be there at all, so I got rid of it. And at the end, I added also a crop, so I can remove all the stuff that I don't need. Let's take a quick look. You can see how responsive it is. It's pretty fast. Well, it should be fast because it's such a simple comp. Anyways, so if I press play here, you can see the yellow lines that are appearing on the timelines. That means they are cached. So if I go back and I press play, I can play it in real time.
Now, for those of you who keep asking me why I don't do compositing in Blender, well, now you get the idea.
About correcting the artifacts, well, I could do some cloning. That's a very fast way to do it. I could also use a blur brush, so I just blur the areas that I don't want. And also what I could do in the blur brush, I could say, for example, I want to put it in max. So it's gonna remove everything that is darker than what is surrounding it. Then I could do a second pass where I will use it in min, so it's gonna make everything darker. And then just go back to the regular, just the over, and just blur everything out. Well, I would have to do this for every single frame. It would take forever. The best would be to fix the problem in Blender directly.
I just don't know how.
If I make a compact version of the comp, I can tell you that I much prefer to work vertically than horizontally. It's more compact and the readability is also much better.
All the files are available, the Blender file, the Nuke file, and I even made a Natron file. Now the Nuke file is non-commercial. If you have a commercial license of Nuke, well, you probably don't need that to be that simple comp, right? Now, if we do a fast breakdown of the shots, well, to do the basic setup, the R&D, it took me about 2 to 3 hours to get it working. You know, I did it on a monkey head to start with. But to do the real thing, it's much longer. So I would evaluate maybe 2 weeks of R&D would be enough to create the effect. It's not that complicated, especially if you use Plan H, it would be much easier to do. Each shot is different, so the close-up shots are not the same as the wide shots because the size of the particles, for example, the ones that you use on a close-up, if you use them from a faraway shot, the particles will be too small, so they cheat. They do it on a per shot base. So they probably have some settings that they can tweak the size of the particles, how they want it and everything. The turbulence is also different. There's a close-up of the arm and you can really see a close-up of all these particles flowing. So that's going to be a special setup because it's such a close-up. You really want to feel the right turbulence going through it. It's not just, the real thing for sure is not just a turbulence field that moves and a wind like I did. There's probably a lot of little turbulence fields that are moving all, you know, like kind of, not secondary animation, but secondary effect if you want. So probably 2 weeks would be enough to develop a general pattern. Now, you obviously in the movie, all the characters, they already have the characters in full CG because all these characters, Spider-Man, whatever, they all jump and do some crazy stuff that are replaced in CG. So they already have the CG model. We don't need to consider this. And they don't need to paint out the Thanos or Spider-Man or whatever like I did. This is just because I'm doing a demo and I didn't have a clean plate in the back. They do. They always render stuff separately. If you render Thanos in the shot that I did, of course you're going to render him separately from the background, because if they change the dialogue or they change the animation or whatever, well, the background didn't change, so there's no point in re-rendering again. So you just re-render Thanos. Obviously, compositing plays a big part in these shots. So what you get out of CG, maybe it doesn't look quite the same as after it goes through compositing, but that's what compositing is for. It's to enhance what's been done in CG. We also need to consider match move, because if we have a character that falls on the ground and dissipates, well, then we need a CG geometry to match it. The match move shouldn't be too long, because as I mentioned before, they already have all these characters in CG rigged and everything. So it's just a question of doing it, and the shots are very short. It's like, 30, 40, 45 frames, 60 frames maybe. So it's not that long. I would say a day to match the animation per character. It's not that long. It shouldn't be that. It shouldn't take more than a day to do this. Compositing, depending on how close we are to the characters, I would say between maybe a day or 2 days to 1 week per shot. You need to do the lighting. Well, if it's a daytime shot, it's easier because you just, it's the sun, one light source. If it's in an orange environment, well, they probably already have the HDRI that they did for the set and everything, so that should go pretty fast. So I don't think it's going to be that complicated to do the lighting in these shots. Well, it wasn't for me. I did very fast, but still, it wasn't that hard. Now, all the numbers I gave to you, you multiply them by 3, because there's going to be retake. They're going to say, oh, well, we want it faster. We want more particles. We want less particles. And also, one thing I didn't do in mine is a layer of dust, because when they disappear, there's a smoke in between, and I just didn't have time to create a dust path for this. But yeah, that's also something that's needed. It's a little bit longer, but the dust doesn't need to follow a very specific pattern. It's not that complicated. It's very thin. It's not like a big explosion. So probably a setup that will take about 2 days, a day or 2 days per shot. Shouldn't be that long. I can't believe it would be longer than that. It shouldn't.
I don't know what happened with this shot. It looks very cheap. It looks like we only see the outside shell disappearing.
And well, I couldn't resist, so I did this for you guys.
I don't feel so good, Mr. Rosendahl.